the ongoing debt talks, including Senate Democrats meeting with Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner and congressional negotiators and the President sitting down at 4:15 p.m. Eastern. We'll bring you information and events throughout the day on the C-SPAN networks. Now, here's the Senate on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. It is my honor and privilege to announce that today's opening prayer will be offered by the Right Reverend Geraldine Wolf from the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island.
Let us pray. Almighty God, shepherd of our souls, the global community listens with eager expectation to the deliberations and decisions of the Senate of these United States. With your holy wisdom, enter the hearts of those who serve in this august chamber. Assure them of your constant love and presence as they address challenges that occasion creative solutions. Let your Holy Spirit come and breathe upon their anxieties, diminishing their power and releasing a freshness of vision that secures the common good and honors the generations to follow. May their pursuit of peace, security, and happiness extend across nations and peoples, moving beyond political allegiances to a proclamation of hope for all humanity. Bless us, dear Lord, and make us a blessing to others. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., July 14, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Sheldon Whitehouse, a senator from the state of Rhode Island, to perform the duties of the chair, signed Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Mr. President, I'm delighted to be here with my senior colleague, Senator Jack Reed, to welcome Geraldine Wolf, the Bishop of the Episcopal Archdiocese of Rhode Island, who shared with us the prayer this morning. I want to share with my colleagues what a wonderful addition she is to our Rhode Island community. She has served in Kentucky and in Pennsylvania, but she has been in Rhode Island for many years and has been devoted to our community, and particularly to the needy in our community, to the point where at one point she spent 30 days living as a homeless person in order to see firsthand what the resources were to support people when they faced the burden and the sorrow of homelessness, and to inform her actions as the bishop of our diocese. She is keenly interested in the Sudan and works with priests who are helping to bring Christianity to those areas as the vehicle for peace amidst some of the worst and most horrific violence on the face of our planet. And it gives Senator Reed and myself both great pride that she has come down to Washington today to open the Senate, and it is my hope, and I'm sure Senator Reed's as well, that during the course of our deliberations today we will be informed by the hopes and the sentiments and the confidence and the blessings that she expressed. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Mr. President, I join my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, in welcoming Bishop Wolf to the Senate today, and I commend Senator Whitehouse for his invitation. Bishop Wolf is not only a pastoral leader in our community, she's also a great community leader. She not only preaches the gospel, she lives the gospel. As Senator Whitehouse indicated, she went on the streets of Providence, the mean streets and there are mean streets in every town in this country, to experience firsthand the travails and the troubles of people just trying to get by. That experience informed her ministry and informed her public positions, and we thank her for that. And she has a global vision as well as a vision in Rhode Island, and that global vision is a world inspired by American actions that is peaceful and progressive and provides opportunity for all. So on behalf of the people of Rhode Island, we want to thank her for her service, and I want to thank her especially for the grace she has brought to us today and has brought to the state of Rhode Island over her service. Thank you.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour. Republicans will control the first half. Majority will control the final half. Following morning business, Senate will resume the wish to proceed to H.R. 2055, the Military Construction Veteran Affairs Appropriations Bill, post-cloture. We hope to yield back time and be in consideration of the bill sometime today. I ask unanimous consent that Michael Lynch, the United States Army Aviation Officer who is currently serving as my Defense Legislative Fellow this year, be granted 4 privileges for the duration of H.R. 2055.
Without objection.
Mr. President, there are some in the Republican Party who will not listen to the truth, no matter who speaks it. This is my opinion. If we allow this nation, for the first time in its history, to default on our national obligations, it will not only be a black mark on our reputation, but also a massive financial disaster that will sweep the world into global depression. But it's not my opinion alone. I've come to that belief by listening to the most respected voices in the business community. Default, they say, and I quote, is a risk our country must not take. They're not the only ones who believe that that's true. The most respected bankers have said it. J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said default would be catastrophic. Investors have said it. Bill Gross, one of the world's largest mutual fund managers, sent us a warning yesterday. He said, quote, there should be no question at all. The debt ceiling must be raised and not be held hostage by budget negotiations. Don't mess with the debt ceiling, Washington, is what Bill Gross said. Economists have also said it. Ben Bernanke, appointed by President Bush as chairman of the Federal Reserve, has said default would be a major crisis that would send shockwaves through the world financial markets. And yesterday he said failure to avert default would mean huge financial calamity. Even other Republicans have said it. This is what Speaker Boehner said in April. Quote, not raising the debt limit would be serious, very serious. Implications for the worldwide economy and jobs here in America, end of quote. And perhaps most telling of all 3 rating agencies have already sent warning shots across our bow. Last night, Moody's cautioned us that America's AAA rating, or AAA rating, was already under review for downgrade. Never in the history of the country has that happened, that we're being reviewed to downgrade our debt rating. We have just 3 weeks left until we miss our first payment. They cited the, quote, rising possibility that we will default. They said that we would lose this crucial rating, which saves every American money every day, even before we miss a payment. Standard & Poor's has told Congress and business leaders that even if the United States keeps paying creditors but delays payments such as Social Security or veterans benefits, that would cut our rating. And Fitch has said a default would, quote, threaten the still fragile financial stability in the United States and the world as a whole, close quotes. So why are some Republicans in Congress still saying that a first-ever default on our nation's financial obligations would be no big deal? When every financial expert, investor, business leader, and banker in the country, and even every reasonable member of your own political party is telling you the consequence of default would be catastrophic, It's time to start listening. Why? Because default won't just roil the financial markets, pushing interest rates higher, and tank the stock markets. It will affect every American's wallet as well. Here are a few things that will happen. Social Security checks and veterans benefits and paychecks to our troops would stop. Some of the most vulnerable Americans would be placed at risk. Our promise to the men and women who protect this nation so bravely and those who protect it today would be broken. We would not be able to make payments to our military. Payments on our national debt would stop. American investments in retirement accounts would be decimated. Millions of Americans could lose their jobs. Interest rates would rise, not only for the government, but for ordinary Americans as well. Those Americans will pay more for their mortgages. They'll pay more to use a credit card or buy a car or finance a university education. They'll even pay more for the electric bills, groceries, and gas. The spike in interest rates and the damage to the United States dollar alone would cost the average American family more than $1,500 immediately. It would be the most serious financial crisis the country has ever faced. And it would come at a time when our economy can least afford it. And in the long run, it would wind up costing the government not millions, not billions, trillions of dollars. A fact Republicans shouting about the debt fail to mention. For every 1% increase in interest rates, it will cost our nation 1.3, again, not million, not billions, but trillions. For every 1% increase in interest rates, it will cost this nation $1.3 trillion. With so much at stake, even Speaker Boehner and Minority Leader McConnell seem to understand the seriousness of this situation. They're willing to negotiate in good faith, which I appreciate, and the country appreciates. Meanwhile, House Majority Leader Eric Cantor has shown that he shouldn't even be at the table, and Republicans agree he shouldn't be at the table. One Republican told Politico last night, at Hill publication, quote, "He lost a lot of credibility when he walked away from the table. It was childish," end of quote. What that's all about, Mr. President, we had negotiations going here on room S-219, it's a short jog from here, and he just walked out on the meetings with the Vice President of the United States. It was childish. Another Republican said Cantor is putting himself first. He said this, quote, "He's all about Eric," end of quote. The time for personal gain and political posturing are over. It's time to put our economy and our country first. The risks we face are simply too great. We don't need to take my word for it. More than 300 respected business leaders wrote to Congress the night before last to make it clear how serious this crisis really is. Quote again, "A great nation, like a great company, has to be relied upon to pay its debts when they become due." They further said this is Main Street, not Wall Street. This is a Main Street issue, not a Wall Street issue. We're listening. It's time for the irresponsible voices in the Republican Party that continue to deny the truth of this crisis to start listening as well. Do you have the quorum?
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President. I'll wait a minute, Mr. President.
Leader is recognized.
I apologize to the Senator from Tennessee. I hope I haven't inconvenienced him. My remarks are not lengthy. Mr. President, over the past few days,
The Senate is currently in a quorum.
I suggest the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, over the past few days, a lot of people have taken it upon themselves to offer Republicans in Congress, and me in particular, their advice on the debt limit. And I've listened to all of it very carefully. I appreciate how frustrating it is for people to think that in spite of everything we know about the state of our economy, despite all the warnings we've heard about the dangers presented by our deficits and debt, that we can't do something about it. I share that frustration. No one has spent more time cajoling and persuading this White House of the need to do something big. I was truly hopeful that the President could be persuaded to view the upcoming debt limit vote as an opportunity to cut Washington spending and the debt that has ballooned since he took office, and to preserve entitlements at the same time. But in the end, he just wasn't interested in doing something of that magnitude that would pass. Really gave us three bad choices: higher taxes, smoke and mirrors, or default. And we refuse to accept any of them. Republicans will not be reduced to being the tax collectors for the Obama economy. We won't be seduced into calling a bad deal a good deal. And we won't let the White House fool around with the full faith and credit of the United States. If the President wants to threaten seniors or veterans or rattle the world economy by pretending he can't pay our bills, he, of course, can do that. But he's not going to implicate Republicans in these efforts. That's why I proposed, as a last resort, a plan that would force the White House to really show its hand. If the President would rather default than cut back on the size and scope of government, let him explain that. If he'd rather preserve his vision of Washington than protect entitlements, let him explain that. If he and the Democratic Senate would rather borrow and spend us into oblivion, they can certainly do that. But don't expect any more cover from Republicans on it than you got on health care. None. The American people deserve to know what their elected representatives stand for in this debate. None of these proposals that have been presented up to now would do that. If Democrats won't agree to the reforms we need, then we should at least show the public where we stand. What they wanted was a deal that purported to lower the debt from $26 trillion to $24 trillion over 10 years. Then have us give it thumbs up and call it a bipartisan victory for fiscal discipline. Well, we weren't about to call this a good deal any more than we were willing to call the health care bill real reform. We refused to let this President use the threat of a debt limit deadline to get us to cave on tax hikes or phony spending bills. It's time to change this debate altogether. It's time to make it clear to the American people where the two parties stand in this debate. Either you're with the President and his vision of a government that continues to live beyond its means, or you're with those of us who believe Washington needs some strong medicine. Either you want to simply borrow and spend our nation into oblivion, or you want to get our fiscal house in order. And the single most effective way to do that is with a balanced budget amendment. If the President and Democrats in Congress won't agree to cut back, let's force them. Let's pass a constitutional amendment that actually requires Congress to live within its means. It's time for the American people to contact lawmakers on the Democratic side and simply demand it. Republicans are unanimous in their support for a balanced budget amendment. We need 20 Democrats to join us. It's an uphill climb, but if the American people speak out, we can get it done. If the President won't agree to it, it's time we go around him and directly to the American people. Let's keep the pressure on. Let's show the administration where the public is on this issue, and let's get our fiscal house in order. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the final half.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. President, I realize that a scheme has been concocted on the debt ceiling that allows Democrats to go into this next election continuing to ensure that spending to many of their constituents is at levels that please them, therefore allow them to run successfully in 2012, and that scheme also allows Republicans to run in 2012 with spending being the issue. So I think we all understand that, look, the debt ceiling is going to be increased, and it's going to be increased in such a way that both sides of the aisle have the ability to campaign against the other respective to their bases. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. President, our great nation is in decline because of the elected leaders in Washington. Our great nation is in decline because of this body and the way it's acting, the House of Representatives and the way it's acting, and the White House and the way that it is acting. So this body today, as we meet and go into a spending bill, is helping our great nation go into decline. And let me explain why. Maybe the debt ceiling was the wrong place to pick a fight as it related to trying to get our country's house in order. Maybe that was the wrong place to do it. The reason it was chosen is because this body hasn't passed a budget in 806 or 7 days. And I credit both sides for that. But the fact is that the United States Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 806 days. I had a dinner this week, Monday night. I had dinner with 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans. I won't mention their names to impugn them in any way. But all of them expressed tremendous frustration with the way this body is being run. Basically, most senators in this body are nothing but two-bit pawns. Two-bit pawns. As a political fight is underway, basically to lay out the groundwork, if you will, for a 2012 election. I mean, that's what's really happening right now in this body, and I think we all know that. And yet, yesterday, we voted to move to a spending bill where we in essence are acting as accomplices. We're accomplices to this. Presiding officer and myself, I voted against it. But anybody who votes to go to a spending bill without forcing the United States Senate to come to terms with a budget is in essence an accomplice to allowing the shenanigans that are taking place right now to continue. We are allowing this great nation to go into decline by not forcing us to make those tough decisions. The reason the debt ceiling was chosen is because there hasn't been any other mechanism to cause us to sit down and make those tough choices as it relates to spending here in our country. Because we were unwilling to do that, many people lined up, matter of fact, Democrats and Republicans. There's a gang of 6 that had been working, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. It's my sense that they, too, had planned to use the debt ceiling vote as a place to try to cause us to come together around something that might be sensible for our country. We haven't seen the details of that. I hope we'll see that soon. But my point is both sides of the aisle actually had focused on this debt ceiling vote, or many people on both sides of the aisle, to try to cause us to have the fiscal discipline we need to have in this country. Obviously, with this new scheme, that's not going to happen. I think we all know the debt ceiling is going to be raised. Blame will be assessed to either side. Both sides will use that in the 2012 election. And then we'll move on to another cycle where probably we will continue to be irresponsible. But the fact is that this body today, by moving to a spending bill without a budget, everyone who agrees to do that, every single person in this body who agrees to move to a spending bill, no matter what it's funding or no matter at what level it's funding the things it's funding, every one of us is an accomplice in causing this great nation to decline, every single one of us. So I would urge people in this body who would like to see us actually do our work, cause us to function the way the Founding Fathers had created this body, cause us to function in a way that no longer allows our country to be in decline. I would urge everybody in this body to not agree to go to this spending bill and to say that we will not spend any more of the United States resources, taxpayers' resources, without first agreeing to those tough decisions. I love seeing some of the masters of the universe on some of these financial programs in the morning. I heard one of them this morning on a particular program that sometimes I turn on to see what the markets are doing in reaction to the ridiculous, undisciplined nature of this body. I heard one of them say that, the debt ceiling is no place. Most countries don't even vote on a debt ceiling. What they do is they vote on budgets. In this country, we don't even vote on budgets. And, of course, we figured out a way to really not make any tough decision on the debt ceiling vote either, and I understand what's getting ready to happen. But, again, to all those folks that aren't head of this body, that aren't in leadership, who in the bathrooms or in the halls or at dinner or at lunch complain about the fact that this place is dysfunctional, complain about the fact that they really don't have the ability to be involved in causing us to function in the way that we should. Every single one of you, in my opinion, that votes to go to a spending bill today or in debate on a spending bill, in essence, allow us to pass a spending bill, is an accomplice in allowing this great nation to go in decline. Now, that's pretty strong, but I believe it. The fact is that we make a big deal out of some items around here, but we don't make a big deal when it comes to something that we can actually affect and cause us as a body to do the things that we need to do. So, Mr. President, our presiding officer, look, I'm very disappointed in the United States Senate. I'm very disappointed in the White House. I'm very disappointed in all of us. I'm very disappointed in the childish behavior that this body has continued to exude over the course of this entire year. I'm very disappointed that we would even consider going on with spending taxpayer resources and not sitting down and making tough decisions. I'm very disappointed, candidly, that both sides of the aisle only want it their way. I don't think this great country was created the way that it was so that one side of the aisle got it exactly the way they wanted it. I think this body was created to be, quote, the greatest deliberative body in the country, and yet we don't do that. We don't act that way. We don't debate tough issues. We hide, all of us, we hide, and we let our leadership concoct ways to keep us from doing the tough things that we need to do. The fact that we can't even have a budget on this floor to come out of a committee when obviously there is a majority, and I'm not even pointing fingers at the other side. I think both sides are equally problematic in this because both sides, it's evident to me, are going to allow us to go to a spending bill today without a budget. But the fact that we can't even bring a budget to the floor when committees are stacked in such a manner that one side does have the majority, to me is an incredible thing. So, this United States Senate, if we move to a spending bill today without a budget, if we continue to do the things that we do here, just without worrying about the fundamentals of what it takes for this country to be great, this body today will move one step closer, one step further down the path of causing this great nation to go in decline, to keep us from making tough decisions, to allow committee heads or subcommittee heads in appropriations to be able to bring forth their fruit, if you will, the things that they would like to spend money on. By the way, I support much. Probably support everything that's in this bill. I'm not sure. Supports veterans, supports military construction. But the fact is that actually the very people that this benefit, the people who have been veterans in the past, the people who have given of their limbs, some of them loved ones, they probably are embarrassed by the United States Senate, too. Even though they'd like to receive the benefits at some point in time down the road when these benefits come to fruition year, they'd like to receive those. They probably would prefer first that all of us in this body do our jobs, that we quit acting like the children we've been acting like this entire year, that we quit calculating what we're going to do around the 2012 elections, that we quit hiding behind our leadership and allowing them to go down and negotiate grand bargains in private, that we quit again hiding from tough decisions. So, Mr. President, I hope today that others will join with me and that we will not end debate on this bill. Let me put it this way. If we don't do that, in other words, if we proceed with spending in this bill, I sure hope that all those who vote to do so will stop talking in private about how embarrassed they are about this United States Senate, will stop talking in private about how they feel like little pawns in a political game, will stop talking in private about how they would like to see this body start acting in the fashion that it should act. We haven't done any real business this year. We all know it. We haven't done any real business this year because we haven't wanted to take on those tough issues. I'm embarrassed by that personally. I'm embarrassed about the way this United States Senate has been conducting its business this year. Mr. President, I'm not going to vote for a spending bill until we pass a budget. If we had passed a budget and had the tough debates about revenues and expenditures, we wouldn't be in this no-win situation we're in right now as it relates to the debt ceiling, and we all know that, but we want to hide behind that. With that, Mr. President, I see the lack of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
recognized.
Mr. President, is the Senate in a quorum call?
The Senate is.
I would ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, as we all know, that in the next few weeks we're going to be faced with a decision about what to do with the debt limit. And of course, there's been a lot of discussion around here and as well as between the White House and the congressional leadership about how best to resolve this issue. And I think what it really comes down to is a question about what's the best way to resolve a debt crisis. And I think it creates a great debate, philosophical debate, about how do we need to grow government? Do we need to shrink government? And really, Mr. President, I would argue that's kind of the defining line in this debate, is whether or not you believe that the best way out of a debt crisis is to expand and grow government, or whether you think, like I do, that we ought to make government smaller, not larger, if we're trying to figure out how to get out of this particular circumstance that we find ourselves in right now. We have a $14 trillion debt. We're going to have to increase the borrowing authority to get through the 2012 election by about $2.4 trillion. That is the rate at which our debt is growing. And I've said on the floor before that if you look at just the daily borrowing that our federal government does, it exceeds the entire budget of my state of South Dakota for a whole year. So we will borrow more in the next 24 hours here in Washington, D.C., about $4 billion, than the state of South Dakota spends in an entire year. That is the dimension of the problem that we are facing. Now, many of us believe that the best thing that we could do in order to get ourselves on a better fiscal track is to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. And frankly, I hope that we will have an opportunity to vote on just that sometime in this next week or the following week. But most states around the country, including my state of South Dakota, have a balanced budget amendment in their Constitution. So it requires them year in and year out to get their books balanced. They can't continue to spend like there's no tomorrow. They can't spend money they don't have. They live within their means. That's what most Americans have to do. That's what American businesses and families have to do. It certainly makes sense, I think, that we ought to be doing that here at the federal level. And so I would argue to my colleagues that if we look at the short-term issue, which is the debt limit vote that we have to have, we've got to figure out how are we best going to deal with that in the near term, but what are we going to do in the long term to put our country on a more sustainable fiscal footing? And I would argue that putting an imposed discipline on Congress, like an amendment to the Constitution that would require us year in and year out to balance our budget, just makes sense. It's practical, it makes economic sense, and it certainly is a discipline that's been lacking here in Washington, D.C. for some time. And if you look at the states that have made hard decisions, mine is a good example of that. They had to cut spending this year significantly to balance their budget, but at least they are doing that. They are making those hard choices and those hard decisions, and that's something that we've been putting off here for way too long. And I would point out, too, to my colleagues here that as we talk about how to get the country back on the right fiscal track, you do have to start setting priorities. Well, we're not doing that. We haven't had a budget here in now 806 days. It's been 806 days since the Democrat majority here in the Senate has allowed us to have a vote on a budget. Now, many of us believe that in order to determine how you're going to spend $3.7 trillion of America's hard-earned money, you ought to have some priorities. You ought to at least put a pathway out there about how you're going to go about spending those dollars and setting priorities for the country. Well, we're not doing that because we haven't passed a budget in 806 days. That is a fundamental responsibility that we have as leaders. The people of this country elect us to do that, and we're not doing it. And I think that is creating uncertainty. I think it's creating instability out there around the country. I met with some business owners this morning who say that in their particular industry that there are people who want to invest. They want to create jobs. They want to make capital investments, but they're long-term investments. And they don't know what's happening here. They don't know what the policies coming out of Washington are going to be with regard to taxes, spending, regulations, all those sorts of things. There's an enormous amount of uncertainty. And there was a survey that was done just recently by the United States Chamber of Commerce in which they asked small businesses about their future hiring plans. 64% of the small businesses who responded to that survey said they were not going to add to their payrolls this year. They weren't going to hire this year. Another 12% said that they were actually going to cut jobs. Why? Half of the people who responded to the survey said economic uncertainty. They just flat don't know what Washington is going to do next. And you can't have that kind of uncertainty. What the markets want, what business wants, what investors want is they want to know what the rules are going to be. They want some certainty about what's going to happen next. And the kind of uncertainty that we're creating, Mr. President, reaches beyond our shores, because I think that you look at what's happening in Europe today. They're facing a debt crisis in many of those countries. And what are the economic impacts of that? Well, if you look at the interest rates in the Eurozone, the 3-year government bond interest rates are 19.4% for Portugal, 28.9% for Greece, and 12.9% for Ireland. That is our future if we don't get our fiscal house in order. Well, what does that mean? That means that not just does the federal government have to pay more to borrow money, to pay more in higher interest costs, it also means that those interest costs, because all the interest rates in this country, whether it's for an auto loan or a home loan or a college loan, they all track with the Treasury borrowing rates. Those rates go up. That has profound implications for our economy. That means that people across this country are going to pay much higher interest rates. Small businesses are going to pay higher interest rates to borrow money. Those are real-world impacts if we don't make the right kinds of decisions here to get this spending and this borrowing under control. So if you want to see our future, look at some of the European countries. Look at what the impact that this is having on interest rates and on their economies. That is something that our economy could not withstand. We're already facing 9.2% unemployment. We have a need to get people back to work, and what we need now is not more expanded government and more uncertainty about what Washington, D.C. is going to do, but we need stability, we need certainty, we need the decisions here to have a favorable impact on the private marketplace and create an inducement to hire people as opposed to discouraging it, which is what we are seeing today. Now, Mr. President, I have argued down here on many occasions that this debt is really strangling our economy because it's crowding out private investment. Anytime the government's out there borrowing money, it means there's less capital out there for private businesses to have access to. I think that the more fundamental issue in this whole debate, however, and I mentioned this yesterday in some remarks on the floor, is really the size and scope of government, and whether or not we want to see an expanded, bigger, larger government, or whether we ought to try and work our way out of this debt crisis by actually reducing the size of our government. And I pointed out that in the past couple of years alone, we have seen government expand dramatically. In fact, non-defense discretionary spending in the last 2 years has grown by 24%. The debt has grown by 35% in just the time that this president has been in office. And the amount that we spend on our federal government as a percentage of our entire economy is growing dramatically as well. The 40-year historical average is 20.6%. That's what we historically for the past 40 years have spent on the federal government as a percentage of our entire economic output. You go back to the year 1800, hard to believe this, it was 2%. We were actually, that's what we spent on the federal government as a percentage of our entire economy. Of course, it's grown at, since that time, but it's really taken off here in just the last few years. And I pointed out yesterday as well that of the 5 times that the budget has actually been balanced in this country since 1969, in every circumstance, it has been when government has spent less as a percentage of our entire economy than the average. So if the average is 20.6 for the past 40 years, the times when we've actually balanced the budget, we've averaged spending 18.7% of our GDP. The point simply is this. If you want to solve this problem, it gets solved on the spending side of the equation. The problem that we have in this country is not that we tax too little or have too little revenue, it's that we spend too much. Because this year, we will spend as a percentage of our entire economy 24.3%. We're almost a quarter of the entire economy of this country now being spent by the federal government. And that will only go up over time as we see these new entitlement programs, a new health care program that was created last year continues to consume more and more of our resources in this country. That means that there is less and less out there for the private economy where the real jobs are created. If you look at just what we pay in interest costs alone and how we would be influenced by a slight uptick in interest rates. There was a great op-ed written in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks back by Larry Lindsey, who was a former economic advisor to President Bush, also a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and he pointed out that if interest rates return to their 20-year average, that it would add $4.9 trillion in additional borrowing costs over the next decade. So everything that we're talking about here in this debate about the debt limit in terms of reducing spending really pales in comparison to just a normalization of interest rates. If we saw interest rates go back to what is a 20-year average, we would see an additional $4.9 trillion that we would have to spend to finance our debt. And that is a staggering statistic, Mr. President, and I think, again, speaks to the need for us to get our spending under control, because the amount that we borrow, as it continues to go up, ratchet up, we continue to get further and further in debt, the likelihood is that our interest rates are going to go up in a corresponding manner, and we're going to end up spending more and more on higher interest. So I think that the real issue here is whether or not we as a nation are going to make a conscious decision that the way that we resolve this debt crisis is on the spending side or on the revenue side. And we've heard our colleagues on the other side, we've heard the President say, we need more revenue. In fact, I've not been in on the discussions that have been occurring at the White House, but my understanding is that one of the latest proposals on the table was $1.6 trillion increase in taxes. In other words, they want to add $1.6 trillion in additional tax revenues in order to get some amount of spending reductions. Well, we've seen this picture before. You go back to the 1990 budget deal that President Bush made with the Congress at the time that was supposed to have 2-to-1 spending cuts to tax increases. Well, the tax increases occurred, the spending cuts didn't. That is our history, Mr. President. That is why making a deal that involves massive increases in taxes on our economy, on our small businesses at a time that we have 9.2% unemployment is a really bad idea when the problem you're trying to fix is fundamentally a spending problem. It would be one thing if we were spending at an historical rate. If we were spending at a rate that's 20.6% of our total economy, which is the 40-year average, it would be different. But we are spending at more than 24% of our total economy. This is fundamentally a spending problem. It cannot be solved on the revenue side. The only thing increasing taxes would do is make it harder, more expensive, and more difficult for our small businesses to create jobs. That is precisely what we want our small businesses to be thinking about doing. Instead, they're saying, 64% of them are saying this next year, we're not going to add to the payroll, we're not going to create jobs. Why? Because of economic uncertainty. Well, we need to create some certainty out there. We need them to know that tax rates are going to stay at a low level, taxes on investment, taxes on income. We need them to know that we are committed to cutting spending and to getting the federal debt under control. We need them to know that we are not going to add massively to the cost of doing business in this country by dramatically increasing the number of federal regulations that they have to comply with. I hear that everywhere I go, Mr. President, whether it's a farmer, a rancher, or a small business owner. Everywhere you go. I heard it this morning in meeting with some of these small business owners, that the regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. are making it increasingly costly and more difficult for them to create jobs. And so, as we get into the final days of this debate, and these decisions have to be made, I would say that the President needs to recognize that this is not a revenue issue. This is a spending issue, and step up and provide leadership and provide a pathway for how we get our fiscal house in order, not by increasing taxes on the job creators in our economy, our small businesses, but rather by getting federal spending under control. I think he would have an incredibly warm and favorable reception from both the House and the Senate who are prepared to do business when it comes to reducing spending and making government smaller, not bigger, and dealing with this long-term structural problem that we have of a runaway debt that is growing literally by the year at the tune of about $1 trillion annually. Now, if we don't do this, as I said before, we are looking at a future that resembles that of many of these countries in Europe that I mentioned. We don't want to go down that path. We don't want to be a country that defaults on our debt. We need to pay our debt. And we obviously need to address this issue of the debt limit, but we need to do it in a responsible way that holds us accountable to the American people who spoke loudly and clearly in the last election that they believe government has gotten too big, is growing too fast, and they want that government reined in. The way that we do that is to rein in federal spending. And that involves not just the discretionary spending that I mentioned earlier, which has grown at 24% in the last 2 years, but also the long-term structural challenges that we face in our entitlement programs, Medicare and Social Security. Republicans here in the Congress are willing to lead on those issues, are willing to step forward and put forward a plan. In fact, the only plan so far that's been put forward to reform entitlements has come from the House Republicans. And it's been criticized by a lot of Democrats, both in the House and in the Senate, and by the White House, but we've yet to see a plan from the other side. 806 days, and we haven't had a budget presented by the Democrat majority here in the United States Senate, nor has the President come forward with a plan that actually does something to reduce spending and debt. The President did submit a budget proposal earlier this year which dramatically increased spending and doubled the debt over the next decade and dramatically increased taxes. That is the message, the wrong message to have received. The message that the people of this country are sending is we want Washington to focus on the spending side of the equation. We want less spending. We want a smaller federal government, not a larger federal government. We want the federal government to do what we have to do, the American family has to do, and small businesses have to do, and that's live within their means. And so I would hope, Mr. President, that this debt debate, as it comes to a conclusion, and I hope it will come to a good outcome, a good result for the people of this country. It is not, we do not want to have this country in a situation where we are not making payments, where we are defaulting on our debt. But we cannot just continue this pattern of raising the borrowing authority of this country, of adding to the federal debt without doing something to get that debt under control, without doing something to reduce the amount that this federal government spends every single year. Spending at 24 to 25% of our entire economy is a trend that cannot be continued, it cannot be sustained. And we need to get back to more of a historical average where the American people, I think, want us to be. The reason that they reacted the way that they did in the last election is because they saw this government growing at a rate that made them very uncomfortable and frightened. And I think that continues to this day because, as I said before, there is uncertainty about the country's future. There is an instability that exists today. And what I heard from these business owners this morning is we want stability. We want to know. We need some certainty about what the rules are going to be, and more importantly, it starts by having a federal government that lives within its means, that doesn't spend money that it doesn't have, and that focuses intently on getting spending and debt under control and creating favorable conditions for economic growth and job creation in this country. That doesn't happen. That does not happen by raising government revenues, by raising taxes. That happens by the federal government exercising fiscal responsibility, reducing spending, reducing debt, keeping taxes low on our job creators so that we can get people in this country back to work. That is the correct prescription for this country, Mr. President. It is a prescription that I hope the President will embrace. I can say that Republicans here in the Senate, and I would dare say Republicans in the House of Representatives as well, are prepared to meet him in working together on that challenge of reducing spending, reducing debt, and creating conditions that are favorable to economic growth and job creation and getting American people back to work. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Just the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. President.